welcome to the Legal Eagle. My guest this week has been Additional Solicitor General. He's a senior advocate in the Supreme Court. He's someone who politely declined to be a part of the bench, and we find out reasons why. I welcome on the show Mr. Parag Tripathi. Mr. Tripathi, as I welcome you on the show, I want to know about your successful journey. We all see you on the corridors in the Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court as someone extremely meticulous and brilliant. I want to go back, sir, and first ask about your school days, your college days. You passed out from Sardar Patel, a topper. You then went on to do economic honors in St. Stephen College. Again, you were a topper there. You went on to do work at Delhi Law Faculty where you topped. And then, of course, you went on to your journey at Harvard, which we're most intrigued to know by. What were your school years, your college years like, and how did they formulate an impression on your mind?
I did my schooling from Sardar Patel Vidyalaya, and we were very fortunate that we had as our principal and vice principal Raghubhai and Jashiban Nayak, who used to give us a small sermon under the sun, as we called it, and which has helped us along our journey in life. By us, I mean all my batchmates who had graduated from the school. I then went for economics honors in college, that is St. Stephen's College, and we had an amazing 3 years there and had the opportunity to mix with some of the brightest minds of our time, and it was a very rewarding experience. I then went to the Delhi Law Faculty, Campus Law Center as it is called, and we had the benefit of certainly the finest teaching faculty at that time in the country, if not in Southeast Asia. Thereafter, I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to the Harvard Law School, and my experience in school, college, law faculty and Harvard, if I may say so, most of all at Harvard, opened up my mind. It opened up my mind to cultural pluralism, to religious diversity, to boundaries of what is and what can be, which is the essential part of, in my view, trying to be a good human being and trying to be a good lawyer. Because unless you do that, you may know that at the Stanford University, there is a book called the Great Books. It's a course, which course has to be done because the view is that people who graduate must have the philosophical infrastructure to deal with what life has to offer. And I think this diversity of education provided me that.
You were one of the very few people who got a scholarship to Harvard at a time when there were very few Indians going abroad. This was a time when there were no mobile phones, there was no social media. Take us through that year there, how it was, how tough it was to get a scholarship, and what did you really inculcate there? I
would say paradoxically, it was easier to get an LLM admission. I was fortunate enough to get in all the universities I applied that time because there were fewer people who were competing. Today it is far tougher, and it's almost unthinkable to get an admission for LLM at the Harvard Law School immediately after you graduate. Yes, what was my experience there? Well, it's a very different setup. For one, in India at least, in the student class, you would always say that, well, I have done very well, but I have really not worked. I don't know how I did well. In the US, there is no such hypocrisy. The people will work hard and they'll say, of course, I did well because I worked hard. So it's not merely a question of whether you worked hard for your exams or not. It's a question of a basic intellectual honesty, which is something which one learns there. I'm not saying it's not there in India, it is, but in US it is much clearer. There is also a sense of self-centrism which is there in US. So in the United States, a fellow student will be not at all interested in sharing his notes with you. In India, he would do it as a matter of course. Then of course, because LLM is an international course, so there are lots of people from different regions and parts of the world. It really opens up your mind to how things are and how the same set of facts can be looked at differently. The professors again are very focused. I remember in the class of Professor Lawrence Tribe of Constitutional Law, and there were 4 Indians in that class. Into the first minute after introducing himself with a degree of awareness of his status, the professor said that I have given you a course material of 32 cases and I am sure you have read them, and tell me what's the common thread running through the 32 cases. And this is happening into the second minute of the class. So education is taken very seriously, and so is cultural and post-educational life. So it was a great experience. I recommend a foreign degree, particularly for those who want to practice law, to go and spend that 1 year, whether in England or in US or Canada or wherever. It's a great experience.
In fact, Mr. Tripathi, you came back to India, you joined important chambers where you worked, you also joined the chamber of the now Attorney General Mr. K.K. Venugopal, where you were for 7 years, after which you became an AOR. That's a choice you made, and you meticulously worked through all the cases, which is what today makes you a very successful senior advocate who's often seen in the Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court. What have been the impactful cases and career milestones in the last few years for you?
There have been not only impactful cases and career milestones, there have been impactful personalities in law and in my life which have really helped me move on in my journey. I wouldn't be very quick to say it's a very successful journey, but yes, to move on in my journey. First and foremost, it's been my parents, because my father was a very distinguished academic lawyer, academician of substantial repute, and we were surrounded in our, we used to stay of course in the university quarters, so we were surrounded by professors and their children in different disciplines. So that had a lasting impact on me, and of course my mother as well, who was a medical doctor in those years. Actually my parents met each other for the first time and married in New York, which was a little unthinkable back in 1956. So then of course the various senior counsel and other lawyers and other partners in law firms with whom I worked, and of course my seniors, that is Mr. S.P. Agarwal in the Delhi High Court, who was a very effective original side lawyer, and our present Attorney General, whom we all know as one of the greatest lawyers of the country. So all of this psychologically drills into you how you have to behave, whether it is in court, how do you prepare a case, how do you meticulously make a preparation, anticipate what the other side will say, anticipate also the pitch and the turf, that is the bench, what are their inclinations, what are their views, how will they react to a particular argument. As far as interesting cases are concerned, I was fortunate after I left Khaitan and Company, which was the first place I had joined after coming back from the US. I was briefed by them, naturally as the junior most counsel, in a matter which involved both writ petition and its complexities and an ongoing arbitration. And there I had the pleasure of working under Mr. Ashok Desai, or Ashok Bhai as we call him, who later on himself became an Attorney General of India, and Mr. Ghulam Vahanvati, who was then the second chair. He was actually the second chair to Ashok Bhai. He again became the Attorney General of India. So I learnt a lot. I had the good fortune of arguing myself the first major SIAC arbitration in India, with the venue in India, and various tax matters which stood me in good stead, because initially when I was appointed as a law officer, it was for direct taxes.
That's lovely. You've actually answered one of the later questions, sir, that I would have asked you on your message to the young lawyers. I ask you another question, since you've mentioned two other Attorney Generals, that is Mr. Vahanvati and Mr. Desai. You yourself have been in government service in 2007 and 2009 when you were the Additional Solicitor General. You've been in government service as a law officer for 4 years. What were those 4 years like? How is it to be a government law officer? It's a time when we've seen There are government servants, there are law officers, there are scams that break out. Do you think, how was your time in government service like?
I wouldn't call it government service because law officers are really not in that sense in government service. But yes, we of course appear for the union. It's interesting, challenging and tough. And it's tough because often you get your briefs at the last moment. And obviously the bench doesn't know that. So you have to be on your toes all the time. But it's a very learning experience. It is a very learning experience. But after a bit, many of the cases tend to get repetitive. So it's a learning experience, and one does get a feeling that, after 3 years or 4 years, one should sort of come back to private practice, because the vast breadth of matters which you have on the private side are really, they are very stimulating and encouraging to your thinking process. And also as a law officer, sometimes you get a little benefit because the judges know that normally it's the private side which would have prepared fully, particularly in the lower courts or the courts below, and the government side therefore always has that little disadvantage. So you have a slight benefit when you are arguing as a law officer, which is certainly not there when you argue for a private party. So both are a great experience, and one should have both if possible.
I agree with that. Mr. Tripathi, you were also at a very young age, roughly around 41, offered to be a part of the bench. You could have variously, with your honor, with your integrity, contributed to the nation by being a part of the bench. You had politely declined, sir. What were the reasons for this?
I think decline is not the right word. I did a check on myself, and to be very honest, I found myself wanting. Because yes, I would go along that yes, I have a reasonable knowledge of law, I am reasonably hardworking, and I do believe I have integrity. But that is only the, if I may use the mountaineering expression, the base camp requirement of what we expect from our judiciary. What you also need is to have that focus towards doing justice, of huge patience. For want of a better word in English, I would say man ki sthirta. You have to look behind. You will be, as a judge, you are bound to be, in a sense, captive audience to lawyers who will insist on long-winded arguments. So you have to work very hard. You have to focus very hard. And you have to ensure that you do justice. And frankly, I found that I probably don't have those capabilities. And I'm not being facetious here. I genuinely feel so. So that is why I found myself wanting in the parameters. And I'm delighted to say that in India, actually that is the principal, one of the principal, if not the principal reason why our democracy is functioning. Most of the other nations which became independent and had a democracy have all said goodbye to it. In India, it's still there. And that is to a large extent because of the outstanding judiciary we have, not only in the Supreme Court, not only in the High Courts, and particularly Delhi High Court, because that's my parent court, but even outstanding district judges. And I think that aspect is often overlooked. The amount of hard work judges have to put in, and particularly good judges have to put in day after day, is extraordinary. And then in today's world, where everything is instant. So supposing a judge gives a judgment, immediately there will be reactions, 30 yeses and 40 noes, and there's immediate scrutiny. I think we have to devise a method where we remove this unnecessary pressure from the judiciary. As it is, there is enough pressure of work, of mounting arrears. We should have a system where the workload on the judiciary is reduced. It's inhuman, according to me.
Mr. Tripathi, you mentioned democracy. I want to ask you, you said often that the Aristotle view should be followed. Where is India as the democracy headed?
I think we can have a whole day seminar on it, Rhythm. Where India is heading as a democracy, frankly, I don't know. But I think, of course, there are naysayers as well. But as one great man of letters had said, that the reports of my death are highly exaggerated. Likewise, the report of the demise of Indian democracy or our democracy being in trouble are, according to me, exaggerated. But yes, a democracy requires perpetual vigil. That is so. And democracy requires independent and vibrant institutions, manned by like-minded people. And that is a work in progress. You can never say that now I have reached and now I will rest on my past laurels. Democracy requires eternal vigil and eternally strong institutions and steps, including incremental steps, to increase the strength and the independence of the various institutions. So it's always a work in progress. And we have seen, as in the US during the Trump presidency, how difficult it is to maintain the integrity of institutions in a democracy.
Mr. Tripathi, I also wanted to come to another question. In India, we have this brilliant litigation, the public interest litigation, the PILs. Often it's used rightly for genuine purposes, but over the last few years, we are seeing it being used fraudulently. In your view, how can we stop the misuse of these motivated, mischievous PILs?
You're right, Rhythm. PIL is a very powerful weapon, and it has been fashioned by judicial intervention of the Supreme Court starting from the late 1977-78 onwards, and fashioned further in 1980s and 1990s. Like all powerful weapons, it can be misused. The courts have by now formulated sufficient tests to deal with the fake PILs from the genuine ones. I am only reminded of what in American jurisprudence is called Stewart's test for obscenity. Potter Stewart was one of the judges of the American Supreme Court, and while dealing with an appropriate test for obscenity, he laid down the test, which I think applies equally to find out what is a genuine PIL. And the test is very simple. I know it when I see it. So when a court looks at a PIL, a court with judges with their experience are able to 9.9 times out of 10 clearly make out, is it a genuine PIL or is it not a genuine PIL, or is it merely a publicity seeking PIL, or is it worse, does it have some other hidden agenda? But you're right, that's an area which has to be always kept in mind, and I'm happy to say, of course, that the judiciary has laid down principles for it.
Sir, I come to a question that several of us speak about together, and I needed an understanding about it from you. I myself passed out of the same place as you, Campus Law Center. I joined the Supreme Court in 2004 at that time when I was practicing, and that time there was a completely different atmosphere that used to be there. There used to be a chuckle heard here, some laughter there. Post 2004, if you look at 2021, it's a completely different atmosphere where lawyers often are aggressive when they address the bench. Sometimes they are angry. There is less humor, sir. There is less humor, even when self-deprecating humor, less smiles. Why do you think there is a sudden shift in the environment where lawyers are taking themselves too seriously and there is less laughter in the legal profession today, sir?
I think that's a very important point you make, Rhythm. There is less humor in the court proceedings. There is greater aggression, and there is a greater attempt of converting a court into a gladiator's arena, where the gladiators are fighting each other to death. It was not always so, and it is not required to be so, because you can always put forth your point, even if the other side is continuously interrupting you, in a manner which is where the point will be conveyed to the judge. And most of the judges in the Delhi High Court, for instance, and in the Supreme Court, really will not appreciate this kind of ambush or high decibel arguments. There are so many instances of outstanding humor in the court. I'll give you one where Sir Lionel Leach of the Madras High Court was listening to a very long argument and a boring argument of a lawyer, and suddenly from outside there was a noise of a donkey braying. So Justice Leach said, "Gentlemen, one at a time." The lawyer got it back, and the lawyer said with a very straight face, "My lord, would your lordships kindly repeat it?" There was an echo. When the lawyer appears before Justice Lionel Leach the next time, there is no carry forward of any indignation or annoyance. That is important. That is also very important. So humor has a role, and as you rightly said, the best humor is self-deprecating. I remember there was a matter, I and another very well-known senior were opposing Ashok Bhai, our Ashok Desai, and we pitched our case too high on fraud, because we kept on saying this fellow is fraudulent, he has done this, he has done that. When it came to Ashok Bhai's turn, he smiled and he said, we were even younger then, though we were seniors, but we were much younger. He said, I appreciate the arguments made by the other side. When I was their age, I also found that everything was laced with fraud. It is only when I added maturity to my years, I came to the conclusion that that can't be the only argument. And that carried the day, because it washed off the entire attempt we had made to build up a case of fraud. So humor can be a very powerful argument. And humor is also necessary to ensure that the arguments go on in a manner which is conducive to hearing and the search of truth, which is what the judge is really doing.
I completely agree with you, sir, and I wish on that note that something is done on that. I also want to keep some time for my question on your hobby, sir. You collect Indian heritage coins. I would like to know a little bit about it. You listen to Urdu poetry. We would like to know some about it. And of course, you're passionate about wine, vinophilia, if I pronounced it correct. You have a diploma from WSET. You're only the second Indian to get it, the diploma, and you're not even in the wine trade. You have the finest library of wine books of over 250 books. I need to know about your fascinating hobbies. You've also been on several wine trips with your wife, Nilima Tripathi, who's also a senior advocate in her own right. Tell us a bit more, sir.
You see, I feel very strongly about coins as a part of India's heritage. I actually call it as a part of India's lost heritage, because it is tragic that India, where we have coins dating back to 600 BC of silver and some gold coins dating back to about 500 or 400 BC, and certainly Indo-Greek gold coins dating back to 300 BC. And there are hardly any coin collectors. And in my own profession, amongst our distinguished lawyers, there is a great passion for beautiful watches, which is very good, for beautiful cars, which is also good, for lovely pens. But hardly anybody, except my good friend Dinyar Maidan in Bombay, nobody else I know amongst the legal field, and one distinguished judge who is a serving judge in the Supreme Court, nobody else I know who has any passion for coins. Because nobody is interested in coins, because it's never come up as a part of India's rich culture. And I'll give you an example. There was a first rupee weight silver coin of Humayun. What a rich history. There's a Mughal coin which has the zarb. Zarb means the mint, where they minted the coins. Zarb, Tibet. Tibet, of course, doesn't mean necessarily the Tibet as we know it, but Ladakh was a part of Tibet. There are Nisar coins which were scattered by the kings on wedding and other occasions. There are beautiful Gupta coins showing the various deities. There are Kushan coins showing Shiva with his 4 arms. Each one of them is a beautiful piece of art in its own right. And there's of course the famous coronation coin of Shivaji, the coronation coin of Krishna Dev Raya, and each coin has a history. Each coin has a context, and I really feel, I wish there were more Indians who would take to this as a hobby. Yes, I enjoy Urdu poetry. Who doesn't? It's a beautiful language, and India has this embarrassment of riches. We have so many beautiful languages with so much lovely literature, and Urdu poetry adds one more dimension to it. lastly, about wines, no, I have not done the diploma because diploma requires even more work. But yes, it's not just drinking wine. Wine is an entire culture. If you open a bottle of wine and if you know enough, you should be able to find out not only what are the grapes which went into it, not only what region of the world it is, not only at times, if you are good enough, the broad vineyard from which it has come, but also the vintage year, whether that vintage year was very cold or very warm, and so on. It's endless and exhaustive. So yes, I think one should have hobbies, and they keep you occupied. And yes, I am proud of my collection of wine books. Not so much of wine bottles. I don't have such a great collection, but yes, wine books certainly.
Sir, on that note, as I thank you for being on the Legal Eagle, it's a lot of learning that we've got, especially when it comes to the judiciary and how lawyers today need to be having that humor again, something that we were so used to as being a part of the legal profession. But also, like you spoke about the entire profession itself, there is a lot of integrity, there is a lot of democracy, there's a lot of things to be proud of. It's something that we'll take with us as a remembrance. And also the message that you gave to all the young lawyers, it's time for them first to be working hard and then the other stuff. Thank you for being on the Legal Eagle with us. Viewers, see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you.